welcome. I am absolutely thrilled to have you here for this explainer today because we're embarking on this really fascinating macro to micro journey. We're going to look at exactly how colorful minerals, literally just pulled straight from the dirt, transformed into the world's most prestigious luxury items. You know, we often look at a beautiful ruby or a sapphire in a museum today and we just admire its sparkle. But the history of how these stones moved across the globe and shaped entire economies, it is absolutely captivating. So get comfortable, focus in, and let's start uncovering the incredible history of gemstones.
So I want to hook you right away with this really fundamental question. How does a stone actually travel from a mine in one country to a crown on a completely different continent? Seriously, think about that for a second. Long before modern shipping, before cargo planes, and definitely before digital tracking, these incredibly valuable pieces of the earth were moving thousands of miles across some seriously treacherous terrain. It's honestly one of the oldest and most daring trade stories in human history, creating this massive global network of movement and immense prestige.
Okay, let's dive right into Section 1, the Ancient Gem Highway. To really grasp this history, we have to imagine the vast overland and maritime networks connecting South and Southeast Asia, the Middle East, and Europe. Now, this wasn't just some single dirt road, right? It was a complex, thriving web of human connection and commerce navigated by people who totally recognized the immense worth of what they were carrying. And what's really interesting here is the profound, deep-seated reverence these early civilizations had for these stones. Just consider this ancient Sanskrit term for the ruby, Ratnaraj. It literally translates to the king of precious stones. That tells us that even thousands of years ago, a ruby wasn't just viewed as a pretty shiny rock. It was royalty. It commanded a deep cultural respect that actually drove people to trade it across vast and incredibly dangerous distances.
Gem history is constantly intertwined with the broader story of historic trade routes, mostly because gems rarely traveled alone. They moved alongside the world's most coveted luxury goods. So traders were moving silk and spices, sure, but they were also carrying Ceylon sapphires from what is historically known as Sri Lanka, and Burmese rubies, bringing them deep into South Asian and Chinese markets, and eventually all the way over to Europe. Imagine a single caravan carrying the scents of exotic spices, the softest silks, and the hardest, most brilliant stones known to humanity. Pretty wild, right?
Moving on to Section 2, Shaping the Precious Hierarchy.
All right, let's step away from those dusty, dangerous trade caravans for a second and walk through the grand, gilded doors of European royal treasuries. Because getting the stones to Europe was really only half the story. What happened once they actually arrived is what truly shaped the gemstone industry as we know it today. The absolutely crucial point here comes down to intrinsic value versus perceived value. Intrinsic value is simply the geological properties of the stone. You know, its hardness, its mineral makeup. But perceived value, well, that is a whole different ballgame. Royal collections played an outsized role in shaping which stones the world considered the most desirable. European royal treasuries and crown jewels essentially elevated diamonds, rubies, emeralds, and sapphires into this super exclusive, precious category based on sheer visibility and prestige, not necessarily because they were scientifically superior to other colorful minerals. The monarchy wore them, they displayed them, they hoarded them, and by doing that, they created a perceived value that completely dictated global demand.
Which brings us to Section 3, Famous Stones and Provenance.
Now that we've looked at the macro view of those royal collections, let's zoom in on the micro and explore the highly specific history of a single world-famous stone. Let's map out the journey of the Hope Diamond. From its origins and early trade out of the mines in the 17th century, we can trace it directly to European royal ownership in the 18th. Then, moving into the 20th century, it has a modern, highly documented auction history before finally finding its present-day home, securely housed at the Smithsonian for the public to see. This journey represents a meticulously well-documented modern ownership history. But, as you probably already know, the Hope Diamond is famous for a whole lot more than just its receipts.
And that leads us perfectly into Section 4, Documented Fact versus Legend. This brings us to a really important pivot. It is time to put on our Mythbuster hats, folks. While stones like the Hope Diamond have incredibly clear and fascinating actual histories, they are very often surrounded by dramatic, highly romanticized storytelling that gets added on long after the fact. So to separate fact from fiction, we have to rely on a crucial concept, provenance. This means verified ownership records, auction history, and museum documentation used to trace an item's true history. Whenever we explore famous historical gemstones, we always want to look for the documented provenance first. It acts as the anchor of truth in a massive sea of storytelling.
There is a stark contrast here between verifiable history and cultural myth.
On one hand, we have verified provenance, the hard ownership records, the auction history, the museum documentation. On the other hand, we have popular legend, which gives us curses, cultural folklore, and all these dramatic myths. Many of the famous curse stories attached to the Hope Diamond, they fall squarely into this second category. They were sensationalized by newspapers and storytellers just to sell a narrative. They are popular legend, not verified historical fact. Now, we aren't saying the stories aren't fun, they absolutely are, for sure, but gem history constantly blends genuine provenance records with romanticized storytelling, and it's just so important that we're able to easily spot the difference.
Which brings us to the core takeaway of our explainer today. We should absolutely treat colorful legends as cultural folklore worth acknowledging, but never as established fact. It is incredibly important to separate historical science and documented provenance from romanticized storytelling. The true history of how these stones traveled the ancient gem highway and ended up in royal courts is magnificent enough on its own, honestly. It doesn't need a fictional curse to be deeply fascinating.
So I want to leave you with this final, somewhat provocative thought. Are the cultural beliefs we attach to gemstones actually more powerful than their documented history? I mean, even knowing the verified provenance of these stones, human beings still naturally gravitate toward the folklore. Why is that? It bridges this fascinating gap between historical fact and cultural belief. And it perfectly sets the stage for where our curiosity is going to take us next as we start looking into birthstones and zodiac lore. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. I really hope you found this structured journey through gemstone history as captivating as I do. Keep asking questions, always keep looking for the provenance, and I will see you next time.